Awesome. So this morning we're going to be looking at our API consumption specifically from last Friday. Y'all did a class with Brian where you did a search. You consumed the ProPublica API and you searched for a US Senate member by last name. So I mentioned in the code help channel, I put a thread there for today's class, and the slides for this class are posted in that thread in code help channel, as well as I mentioned that for this first part of class, I'm going to be kind of just coding in front of you all and talking through some refactoring patterns and just like my reasoning behind why I'm refactoring what I'm doing. And I'm going to be branching off of the Congress search that Brian had pushed up, that branch. I think it's called Congress search. If you want to code along, you're more than welcome to grab that. We're going to get to a point down here where you all are on your own or in pairs. You also have an option to work with me if you'd like. But I've kind of like built out another branch for a workshop. Don't pull this down yet. But if you want to kind of like code along with me, then just branch off of the Congress search that Brian pushed up. Awesome. So to warm up, what I'd like to do, I'm going to take this and put it into your chat because I know not everyone has Brian's code pulled down yet. And these are the questions that I want us to think about this morning before we jump into like actually refactoring. So if you take a look at the search action in the Congress controller, and you know what, it's Monday, we did this on Friday. Let's review really quick what this is, because I think that that was a few days ago. So just like a little reminder here, let's go ahead and run our server. And let's take a look at what we have. So this is what you created on Friday, search for Senate members. And really all this does, I think it just gives you back the Twitter handle. So Senator John Hickenlooper takes us to a new page, displays that senator, and it shows us their Twitter handle. So that's what we did last Friday. All of it on Friday was pretty much done in this controller action for searching. And the goal of this like first half of class today is I want to refactor this controller action with you all. So taking a look at it, I'm going to give you a little extra time since this is like, since it was a few days ago. I want to do, let's say 6 minutes of just kind of reviewing what you need to with what happened on Friday, mainly looking at this search action. And I want you all to focus on the questions that I put into the chat. It's also on the slides. So the questions are, taking a look at that Congress search action, the Congress controller search action, what pillars or principles of OOP is our code going against at this moment? So again, we've already talked about like, this doesn't look great. We need to refactor this, but what is it about this code that doesn't look great? What are those principles? What are those pillars that we're not exactly hitting at this moment? And then the next question, I kind of like have like a little prep here, said, when we talk about design patterns, which we'll talk about today, we're talking about using a pattern to implement code that follows some form of convention for a certain purpose. It supports clean code, organization. It helps developers know where to put things when they're working on code together. You can think of like MVC. MVC is a design pattern that we've used. It's a way of organizing your code into logical portions. So we talk about like, with MVC, the business logic would go in the controller, or data logic goes in models, presentation logic goes in views. So it's kind of like a set of kind of norms for where we organize our code. And so with that in mind, the second question here is, in our search action, can you identify any like logical portions? Can you kind of like separate that to say like, okay, these few lines of code is working on this and put a name to it. These few lines of code is working on that and put a name to it. So just looking at these two questions, let's go ahead and take 6 minutes. I'll go ahead and leave this code up and I drop those questions in the chat for y'all.
Does anyone else hear some background, like very faint speaking?
I think it was breathing.
All right, let's go ahead and come back together. And curious from you all, so let's go ahead and take volunteers for this. Taking a look at this first question. So what pillars or principles of OOP would you say our code is going against at this current moment? I'll wait till I get a few hands up. I think it's probably a lot of y'all have come up with an answer or two to this. Okay, let's see. Regina, what would you say? What pillars or principles of OOP is our code currently going against?
It's not very restful.
Cool. Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what about it?
Well, when you are doing RESTful routes, you, for the most part, want to stick with the 7 verbs within your controller, and search is not one. Yeah, so I don't know which page this is necessarily working on within the application. But basically, yeah.
You're good, you're good.
Yeah,
Cool.
but basically that's it's not RESTful because search isn't like one of the RESTful routes.
Yeah, and I think that's like a great thing to point out. This isn't necessarily a RESTful action. Also, at the same time, Congress isn't necessarily a resource that we have. It's just a controller that we have here to be able to call to an API. And so in that case, like I'm okay with it being non-RESTful. And I think a lot of people have other opinions of this too, but I kind of like it when it's like not necessarily a resource to have non-RESTful looking routes, because then I can look at it and say like, oh, this is not a resource in my database. Like I think that helps me identify that that's just like something that is not controlling something that is this application's resources. So I'm okay with it being like that, but I think that's fine to point out that this isn't RESTful. What else do y'all see? Like what else is maybe a little funky about this? Molly?
It's not adhering to the single responsibility principle.
Yeah, cool. I like that. I'm gonna put here like not RESTful. That's okay. Not a resource. And that's kind of like up to you as a developer if you wanted to change that. And then Molly, you mentioned single responsibility principle. Yeah.
Yeah, so it does several different things within that same method.
Yeah, so we are doing quite a lot here. We're like calling to this service and parsing that, getting the members, like going into that JSON and grabbing the members and then going through that like hash like structure, that object there, and finding with each like senator object, which one has last name that matches the search parameter. So yeah, there's a lot going on here. What else? Jermaine?
I forgot my name, so I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was just saying the abstraction was one of the 4 pillars, and just hiding kind of the complexity of the code. Like we're doing a lot, so it's kind of continuing on what Molly said.
Yeah, awesome. So in addition, I like that. In addition to like this, we're doing a lot in this one action. Something that we could do to kind of like pull out that like excessiveness within this one action is abstraction. And the purpose of abstraction is to kind of like hide away. Sometimes like we could call it like sensitive, but just like code that isn't necessary at that level. Would you add anything else to that, Jermaine?
No, it's just the complexity. Yeah, that was it. Hide away code that's not necessary, and I guess making it more simple, I would say.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jermaine. What else? Rich.
Yeah, I agree with Molly, SRP. But I also agree with Regina. I'd probably refactor the controller to be congressperson, and instead of being a search, have it be a show. That way you have like a way to say, I'm going to show a congressperson.
Yeah,
And
I like that a lot.
potentially you could dry up the code too, a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I think that this like, cool. I think I'm gonna leave, just since we're focusing mainly on these like pillars and principles, I'm gonna leave the route how it is, but I like this idea of pulling it out into another controller. That's like, if you wanted to take that route of making all of your controllers RESTful with those actions, then I think this is a great way to do it. Thanks for that suggestion, Rich. And I would agree, like, I think this will be a little bit more visible when you all get into the workshop later. Currently, like, we're not really repeating too much in here, but when it gets to making more calls to the specific API, we're going to get into some repetition. So we're going to start drying up our code once we start kind of like building out different calls that we're going to be making, different actions within this controller. Anyone else have anything to add? Andrew, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I agree with the general sentiment that that people have been talking about with regards to the non-restfulness and the search stuff and that kind of idea that, you know, there's clearly something here that shouldn't be here. But I think I identify the solution slightly different, not so much in making it RESTful, but in the idea of encapsulation. Like this is the controller, so it shouldn't have all this logic in it. That should be put away in a separate place, encapsulated, and then the controller should call on that method. And so, yeah, I agree that this is, you know, completely kind of out of place, as people have been saying. And I think that what we need to do about that is use the principle of encapsulation to kind of like contain it and put it put all the logic in a lower thing that can then pass stuff up to the higher stuff.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I think encapsulation, I put here like bundling together methods and data that are like along the same lines or along the same theme within a specific class. And we're definitely, we'll start with that, actually. I think that's great. And since we're working in object-oriented programming, that's kind of what this is coming back to, is like, let's make objects out of things. Let's utilize that like single responsibility principle. Let's make objects that have specific responsibilities. And those responsibilities are like whatever actions we call on them. Lee?
I actually had a question around the controllers and you kind of saying like, let's just make another controller. How many is too many controllers?
Good question. I think that's honestly like up to how your company or whatever project you're working on, how you all decide to break up the controllers. If your controllers are like very semantic and like, I think Rich mentioned doing like a congressperson controller, then I would stay along those lines of like making many controllers so that you could have RESTful actions. And it really is just kind of up to how you plan on organizing this. But I wouldn't say there's like a limit to having too many. It's just how you want to organize it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Andrew, I see your hand still up. Is that
Sorry.
from before? Oh, you're fine. Just making sure I didn't miss anything. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and jump to this next one. I like all of these. I don't even think I have anything else to add. I think y'all covered the things that I wanted to cover. And we kind of already talked about this portion here, But taking a look at this search action, can you identify any of those like, we kind of like going back here, we talked about like SRP, single responsibility. We talked about like bundling different actions that are happening within that search action. And we talked about like abstracting, pulling away. So can you think of, and we're not even going to get into like using the words right now for what design pattern we're going to be using today. But can you think of like, when looking at this code, how would you separate what is happening, like the different responsibilities of this search action? What are the like logic chunks in here? What's happening? Lawrence?
Sorry. The call is a chunk. The JSON swapping to a hash is a chunk. JSON reading, and then the manipulation of that hash.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. So the call to the API, you mentioned the parsing down here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the other part. Oops. I'm going to put that like calling to the API. I'm going to put that like and parsing the response kind of with this like calling to the API. I think those kind of loop together as like API call portion. And then you mentioned, what was the other? Go ahead.
Oh, the last one was manipulating the hash to find the data you wanted. Just noticing early that the JSON parsing that response appears to be basically those two lines, or that line there is always shows up. Is there a shorthand for that, or is it just something we have to deal with?
Yeah, just something there might be. I always just write it by hand, and we'll get into like once we get through kind of pulling this out into different classes, and probably like after y'all do the workshop, we can talk a little bit more through like how can we pull out even smaller pieces of some of this. And I think that's a portion where I would pull out like, okay, that parsing of the response happens all the time, and it always looks like that for the most part. So maybe I pulled that into its own separate method. So we can talk about kind of like abstracting that, pulling that out, and drawing up our code with that a little bit later. Regina?
Is all of this work with like calling the API and its manipulation, is this generally within a service folder?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
is this
that's
part of it? Okay.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, I
Okay.
haven't really attached words to it yet. What we
Okay.
will be working with today, and let me actually just like jump over. I'm going to paste this here just so we have it. Oh, gross. Still gross. I'm going to leave it there. Learning goals for today's class. Thanks, Regina. Yeah, so by the end of today's class, we want you all to be able to refactor the, in our case, like right now we have everything in this controller action. So we want to be able to refactor this into a service and a facade. So those are words that like, I'll say them now. We'll talk a little bit. Like, I think I want to just like think about these logic chunks and pull out the logic chunks. And then I want to come back and like assign those words to them. But yeah, we will get there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Let me think. Cool. Yeah, I think that those are like the main things that I see here too. Calling to the API and data manipulation. And I think I feel pretty good about that. Let's go ahead. I like this, like, I think I'm going to use this as just a guide on how I want to refactor this. I'm going to leave this here. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So let's go ahead and come back. Let's do 34. Come back at 34 and we'll get started on refactoring. All right, so coming back to this search action and taking a look at like, we've identified the areas like these like logical portions that we're saying this could probably be, this is like its own chunk. We can abstract this and encapsulate into something and abstract it out. So taking a look at this, we said like, okay, here's kind of, this is dealing with our call to the API and the data from our API. And this is mainly dealing with like the manipulation of that data. The other thing that I want to add in here, let me just like gonna write this all down. So I think the first thing that I want to do here, Andrew, you brought up this idea, you brought up the idea of encapsulation at first. And I think with that, I think about currently like how we're dealing with what we're sending to the view, this like @found senator, this is actually just JSON that we're sending to the view. And if we're working in object-oriented programming, which we are, ideally, we're not sending that raw data to the view. Instead, and what we worked with a lot and y'all worked with a lot in mod 2 is instead of sending that raw data to the view, what would you prefer to work with in the view? Take a hand. What's probably preferable? Taya?
A instance variable or a instance of a model class. God,
Yeah.
never mind.
You got it. You got it. Instance of a class. Cool. I like that. Yeah. So just an object, right? Like yes, we are sending this object that is like a JSON object to the view, but it'd be nice if we had class objects to send to the view that we could call methods on to be able to get the data that we want. Currently in our view, if we take a look at the search, HTML, currently in order to like show the senator's first name and last name, we're just directly accessing this instance variable that we pass to the view, or that we define in our controller and we have access to in our view. But this instance variable, what it is it's JSON. And so in order to access it, we're accessing it like a hash to get the value that's in the first name key and the last name key and the Twitter account key and getting all of those values. Ideally, we're working with objects. And so the first thing that I want to do here is instead of sending the JSON to the view, I want to send object to the view. And then I want to go ahead and get into separating out these like logical portions, which is where I'd say like these portions. These portions are. I'm going to run my tests one more time, make sure everything's passing before I start breaking. I'm going to take the red-green refactor approach to this. I have a test right now that is passing for this functionality of being able to search for a Congress member by, or sorry, a Senate member by last name. And so I'm going to keep that test there. I'm going to wait to add any tests. I'm going to kind of like backfill tests once I abstract this out more. Once we abstract it out, like, yes, that's good. That's definitely good practice, but now there's more dependencies amongst different classes and other methods. So we will want to build out the tests eventually. But for right now, I'm just going to do this red-green refactor and make sure that I can get my current test to pass once I refactor it the way that I want to. So starting with this first one, send object to the view instead of JSON. So let's get rid of this for now. Make this a little bigger. So down here is kind of where we're getting started with grabbing the members from that JSON and iterating through and finding a match for the last name and the search. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of like run through what I would want to happen here and then just keep running my test. So instead of like using this JSON, I'm going to say, let's go through the members and or the data that comes from entering into the members key in our JSON. And let's go ahead and map through that. And everything that I get back, each individual, let's actually take a look at this. I think I have it pulled up in Postman. Yeah, so this is kind of where I'll be. I'm looking at them inside the members array. And inside the members array is this like hash-like object that has information about one senator. So when I'm iterating through, I'm going to say map through the members, and let's go ahead and say this is Senate member info, senator. And I want to make objects out of this data. I don't want to work with just this raw data anymore. So little dream driving. Let's say I created a class called Senate member. And passed it that member data. if I run this, like right now, I don't have a Senate member class. And this isn't something that I have stored in my database. What we're going to be creating right now is just a plain old Ruby object to be able to track data in a way that we know how to utilize. The way that we know how to utilize data is when it's an object, when it's wrapped in a class. And so that's why I'm creating this just like plain old Ruby object, and I'm passing over this data, and I want to create an object so that I can send objects off to my view. So I'm going to need to create, let's go ahead and make a directory for pull rows. And then I'm going to go ahead and touch a Senate member pull row. And again, plain old Ruby object, going back to mod 1, when you have a class Senate member that I want to start with attributes, I'm going to go ahead and put an initialize method in here. And I'm taking in senator member data. I'll just use that same word. Let me go ahead, let me put a pry in here. And I'm going to run my test just so that I can hit this and see kind of like, where am I at? What do I have access to? Okay, so I got over to my pull row. Again, I got there with my first iteration here, passing over senator member data. If I take a look at senator member data, you can see I have this object, this hash of one senator's information. This is Senator Baldwin's information. So looking at like kind of what I need from this, let's take a look at the view again. I'm just trying to think like, what do I want this object to know about? And so in that, I'm thinking, what do I want to display in the view, at least for now? Looks like first name, last name, and Twitter account are really the only information that I need at this moment. I might decide to build this out a little bit more. But in here, I can still access those by saying senator member data, first name, Tammy. Great. So in my initialize method, I'm going to go ahead and set these attributes in here and say, let's have first name be, let me just copy this. Senator member data for first name. Let's do the same thing with last name. And then let's also do it with, oops, Twitter account. And then to be able to read that information, let's go ahead and put an adder reader up here for all three of these. First name, last name, and Twitter account. Joe.
Yeah, let's just say that the hash object you're working with to attach to the object, its attributes. What if it didn't have all the attributes that you needed? Would you create another object or objects, or would you just write like some methods?
Yeah, I would probably just write a method in that case. That's essentially kind of like what this is doing. And if you needed to, I don't know, perform some type of calculation or concatenate something or do whatever you needed to be able to get some form of state onto this Senate member, then you could also just put a method here. And then whenever you have your Senate member initialized, when you call that method, it can perform that whatever calculation, whatever it needs to do.
Perfect. Yeah, it was just in reference to the project, cast and reviews, aren't as simple as calling his attributes. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. So we have this Senate member. Let's go ahead back and just take a look again at what we're trying to do. So great, we called Senate member.new. I'm going to put a pry here as well. And just, this is like, honestly, when I'm refactoring and I don't have like all of my tests done for the classes that I want to pull things out into, I usually just like put pries everywhere and pause my code and check to see what I'm working with. So I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to run my test again. And I'm currently at my pry right here. Let's see it down here. So I want to know, what is my senators now? Sweet. So this looks like it's working. It looks like I was able to pass all of the member info through to the Senate member, plain old Ruby object, and just make Senate member objects. Now I have this collection of Senate members, and what I'm doing in the next part of my controller, my action here, is I'm looking through the senators and I'm trying to find the senator that has a last name that matches the search param. If I run this right now, I'm going to take a look. One failure. I'm getting this undefined method indexing this array or this hash with last name for the Senate member object. And if we think about like, what did we actually just changed? This is no longer just JSON. This is actually objects that we are familiar with working with. So instead of accessing it, since it's as a hash, now it's an object. If I go ahead and pull this down here, oops, run my test again, and take a look at senator, it's this Senate member object. And so instead of accessing it like a hash, I can go ahead and just access it as my object, since I put this outer reader on here, senator.last name. In addition to that, I'm also, and I think I'm going to run the test just so we can see this, but there's a little bit more that I'm going to have to do. Pry. Get out of here. Okay, still one failure. This is actually coming from the view. If we take a look at, that view, the search HTML, we're still accessing this object that's passed to the view as JSON. But again, now we have passed just an object, a Senate member object to the view. So instead of accessing it like JSON, let's go ahead and that's not what I want to do. Darn, I'm like trying to do shortcuts and it's not working. Whatever, this is fine. Okay, so now we can just go ahead and access them with those outer readers that we put on, those attributes that we have on our plain old Ruby object. Okay, red, green, good, we got green. So we've done this part here, send object to the view instead of JSON. That feels better to me. We have that encapsulated into its own object now instead of just using JSON to send to the view. The next part here, we're talking about like separating logical portions. Aaliyah?
Just a quick question on that, like sending objects to the view. This weekend, I came across the concept of structs, which would it's like a data type that would let you enter something maybe as a hash, turn it into a struct, and then instead of basically creating a class where it's just a class for adder readers and there's no other methods, you could just like call dot attribute and return it in that way. Is that something that's just like down the road, we'll use that as an easier way to do this? Or is it like, no, you actually want to have a class that creates objects that you're sending to the view?
That's a good question. And I think that's something that we won't necessarily talk too much about in mod 3. I think if you want to take a look down that route, you're welcome to. Essentially what you're doing with that is like, you are still passing something to the view, correct? And I think that kind of like aligns a little bit more with a design pattern of using, I guess a decorator is what I would kind of associate it with, of like getting everything that you would possibly want for the view and sending it to the view that you can like iterate through within the view, but it's still sending one big object to the view with multiple objects inside is my understanding of it. But yeah, we won't necessarily get to using a struct in mod 3, but yeah, you're welcome to take a look at it. And if you want to kind of follow up more with it, feel free to pose that question in the thread, the code help channel, and we can talk a little bit more about it there. Awesome. Cool. So jumping to this next part, and yeah, y'all can, I feel like y'all are comfortable with asking questions. So truly just raise your hand if anything pops up. The next part that we have here is separating these logical portions. Lee?
I apologize.
You're good.
I don't have I don't know if I have access to anything because it says nil class. Should it say that, or did I do something wrong?
When is it saying nil class?
I've been following along with you, and so it says that undefined method first name for nil class, and when I was prying in when we created the Senate member poros, everything was nil. So I don't know if I just don't have access to the API, but I just pulled it down, so I don't know. It's also not.
Are you using fixture data? It might not be an API issue if you're using the fixture data in the test. Do you want to, what time is it? Do you want to share your screen really quick?
Sure. Okay. Cool. You see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. So make this a little bigger, but this is what I was getting when I did that.
Okay. Can you, yeah, I want to see that you can create senator objects. Senate member. Can you put a pry on 7?
Yes, here.
Yeah, and can we also put a pry on 11?
Yeah.
Okay, what's JSON? Okay. That looks okay to me. Go ahead and, oh. Okay, I think I see it.
Oh, great.
So this JSON results, if you take a look at, go ahead and scroll up in your terminal to where you wrote JSON, you put JSON, and then we see this JSON coming back. So you're just going into results and mapping through that, but you have to go another layer in. I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can see this.
Okay.
So since it goes to results, and then you have to go into that array and then go to members.
Yep, cool. Missed the first members. Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right, so jumping into the separate logic portions section here. So we have an API call being made, and then we also have this data manipulation happening as well. So let's focus first on this call to our API. And I would consider all of this is dealing with the response from our API, calling to it and then handling the response. Yeah, let's go ahead. I'm gonna just copy this for now, and going with this idea of encapsulation and abstraction, I'm going to say that let's create a class. I'm going to call this Congress service. So this class is going to be responsible for calling to my API and getting a response. And what am I trying to do here? The call that I'm trying to make, let me put that down here, is getting the US Senate members. So let me go ahead and say US Senate members. I'm putting a class method here. I don't necessarily need to initialize Congress service. I just want to pull this code somewhere else into another class. So I'm going to make it into a class method. And let me go ahead and let's make a directory for services. And let's go ahead and touch Congress service.rb. Let's open it up over here. This essentially too is just another plain old Ruby object. We could have called this whatever we wanted to. I'm calling it service. mainly because we're doing this facade service pattern. And essentially, like, it is a service that's calling to get information for us. Lee, I see your hands up. Is that from before? Did you have another question? Okay, cool. And the class method that we're making here, we're kind of like declaring that we want to be present, is US Senate members. And I copied all of that from what was originally in my controller, and I just pasted it into this class method. So just pulling it away, encapsulating it into this Congress service class, and putting it into this US Senate members class method. So all I did is just pulling it into another class. There may be like something else I need to do to refactor here, but I pulled it out. Let me go ahead and save it. Let's run our tests, see this red green refactor. Okay, cool. So we got one issue, we got one failure. So it looks like this is in my Congress controller. So over here, and it doesn't know what JSON is. So I replaced all of this code with just this call to the Congress service, but I'm still then going through the response. So I'm going to go ahead and assign this to just the variable JSON, since this is the response that I'm iterating through later. And let's go ahead and run this now. There we go, red, green, we're green. So we've gone ahead and we've encapsulated and we've abstracted out that call to our service. We can definitely keep going and pull this into other methods. I'm going to leave it like that for right now and keep going with the second part of our separation of logical portions. So we have a call to the API. This is done. And put here, service. And then the next part that we're saying here, that's a part of our search, is this like data manipulation. And the data manipulation that's happening is getting the data, creating Senate member objects from it, and then from that, finding the senator that matches the search parameter. So all of this I would consider to be like some form of data manipulation. We are creating objects, and then we're finding a certain object. I saw a hand pop up and then it might have gone down. Did I miss someone? Molly?
It was me. I think you're going to talk about it next, which is why I put my hand down, but I was going to ask about why you wouldn't return objects from your service, or whether it's conventional to return JSON specifically from your service versus like returning the object from there.
Yeah, good question. And I think we will kind of get to this, but thinking about like the responsibility of the Congress service, I truly just want it to go and get data for me. And we're going to get to this like data manipulation portion. And this is where I would take that data and create the objects. So I want the Congress service to just be responsible for making those calls. I don't want to worry about anything else within that class of Congress service. But in another class where I'm focusing mainly on manipulation of that data, that's where I'll go ahead and return those objects to the view.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you still have that question once we get into this portion, then definitely raise your hand again and ask.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, so data manipulation. Again, taking a look here, I'm going to go ahead and just do the same approach, and let's just go ahead and let's get rid of this. Oops. Gosh, freezing. And let's say here, instead of all of that, I do want this @found senator to be the variable that gets passed to the view. So instead of all of this, let's go ahead and do @found senator is equal to data manipulation. Let's just say Congress data management. That's the class I'm going to make. And what do I want this method to do? I want it to return a senator based off of that query, the last name that I pass in. So let's make a method that is called Congress data management. Find senator by last name. Okay. And I'm going to need a place to put this class. So I'll go ahead and make a directory. Let's just call it data management. And let's go ahead and put this Congress data management in that folder. Okay, so again, just another plain old Ruby object, Congress data management. And in here, I'm saying let's have a class method called find senator by last name. And I just copy and pasted what was in my controller and put it into this method. So pulling it all out, encapsulating it into its own class. We might see here, there's like a few things that we'll see when we run the test, but I think I'm going to have to pass some data to this method because I don't think that this method has access to everything that I need it to in order to manage this data properly. So let's go to run our tests. What did I do? Cross data management, unable to auto load constant Congress data management. Let's see what I did. Congress data management. Looks like they're named the same, Congress data management. Let's take a look at our files. Okay, unable to autoload constant Congress expected. Congress data management.rb to define it. Did I spell something wrong? Does anyone see anything? Oh, I didn't even save it. Geez, okay, let's try this again. Hopefully that was the issue. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, let's take a look at what this error is. And I want to get, let's say like once I get this to green, let's go ahead and take a break after that. But I want to get this test passing. There's still a little bit more I want to do with the refactoring, but I don't want to end with red tests before break. So undefined local variable or method JSON for Congress data management. Again, I took everything that was in this controller action and I just went ahead and pulled it into a class method in this new class that I made, this new plain old Ruby object. And it's saying that we don't know what JSON is in this line 3 right here. So let me go ahead and just pass in. I have access to that in my controller action. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in that JSON and see if that takes care of that. Another failure. Okay, undefined local variable or method params for Congress data management. So over here, we don't have access to params in this pull row. The only place that we have access to params is a method that we're able to use. It actually comes through application controller. We inherit in our application controller from action controller base. And this is where that method of params is available. So we can only access params within controllers. So instead of accessing it here, let's also pass over params search. Let's pass that over. And let's just say that we're also getting in here a last name. Run it. Okay, cool. We are green. So I was able to, we definitely have like slimmed this action up quite a bit. There's a little bit more that I would like to do with this. But just kind of as a review, what we did was we took all of the code that was in there that was calling to our API, calling to our service, getting all of the senators back, iterating through them and finding a match. What we did was we created a service. Oops. And this service is responsible for that API call. And it went ahead and it parsed that information to give us back clean JSON. And then from there in our controller, once we got that back from our service, we went ahead and we called to this other class, Congress data management. We called this class method, find senator by last name. We passed it the JSON that we got from the Congress service. And we also passed it the search that came in through our params. And we put that method, we pulled it into this guy over here, where we take in the JSON from our service, the last name from our user, whatever they put in for the search. And we are creating Senate member objects and finding that senator by last name. Okay, we've pulled out chunks of data. Mark, question.
Maybe a basic question, but
Good.
this data management, it's like manipulating the data. And I guess normally, like maybe in mod 2, in the models is where you manipulate data, or that's what I thought. But I'm curious, like, why isn't this like in the model versus like creating your own folder and file?
Yeah, great question. I think of this like data management. And when we come back, I want to talk about like renaming this facade. This is like essentially what a facade is. And we'll get to refactoring that facade a little bit more for what we want a facade to do. But essentially what we want to happen within a facade, essentially what I'm like trying to do here, trying to start here, is I want to slim my controllers up as much as possible. And so what I would really like for this facade, in our case, this data management class, to do is I would really love for it to take care of everything behind the scenes for me. So that means eventually I would really love for it to make that call to call my service. And then also with that response, gather what I need to send back to that search action in that controller to send off to the view. So this kind of acts as like kind of like a front for everything that needs to go on behind the scenes. And it passes whatever is relevant for whatever action needs to happen next. In our case, rendering a view, it's going to pass that back to the controller. Does that kind of help answer that question, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. It sounds like it's more data management versus data manipulation, which the model would do, right?
Yes, if it was specific for that object. In this case, like I'm thinking about the data management as just like when I make a call to an API, how do I want to handle all of that information? So specifically the data that comes back from the API, that's what I'm managing here.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, so would you say then that like if you're manipulating data that's saved in your database, which this isn't, then that would be when you would use it in a model. And when it comes from an API, the facade is the way to go. Yeah,
I think so. I think that's like, I don't want to say yes definitive to that, because I think that you can have different reasons why you'd want to put that manipulation elsewhere. But in general, if you are dealing with data coming back from an API, using the pattern that we're using right now, this facade pattern, we would want to manage that data from within the facade.
Okay, that makes sense. I do have kind of one more question on top of that, just in terms of like when is there kind of a definitive answer on when you would take API information and save it in your database versus when you wouldn't? And does that have to do more with like cookies and sessions and like the amount of data you're storing and I guess what you're doing with it once you call it?
Yeah, I think like when I think about using an API, the reason why I'm using an API is because that data is managed elsewhere and I don't need to worry about it. And so if I don't need to save that data, then I am going to choose not to, because that reason of why I'm calling to an API is so that I don't have to manage that data myself.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there will be times when like you want to hold on to information that you get from an API, and that's like up for you to make that design decision on what you want to save. I think more often than not, my go-to of thinking like, how do I save this? I would probably tend towards kind of caching it, and we'll talk more about that in like week 5, so that I don't necessarily have to save it to my database still. Andrew?
Yeah, so on this topic, is it would speed play a factor in this not decision, but this question of when to save something? Like, could it be faster to save it into your database than to make a bunch of API calls to get all the information? And is that something that is that one reason why we might want to have something in a database rather than in an API, like to make the programs run efficiently?
I think that it could possibly be faster, Andrew, to access something from your database. Rather, it depends on the API. But I will say, like, with that, like, again, another reason why we're using APIs is because, or to gather data that we need is, yes, so that we don't have to manage that data. And a lot of times it's because that data is going to change, and we don't want to be responsible for that data changing. So when we make that call again, if we are relying on what we have stored in our database, it's possible that the information that came from the API has changed. And so that's kind of why I would lean more towards like storing this elsewhere, AKA caching. And you can set up caches, and we have a lesson on that if y'all are super interested in looking into that now. But again, we'll get to that later. But you can set them up to refresh at certain times and whatnot, just to make sure that that data is continually updated. Taya?
About whether you're saving API data to your own database, I had an example of a project where we were querying we were like interacting with an API in order to get initial information about it was like classical music pieces, and then we wanted to add things to each music piece. So we ended up saving that piece to our database, and then we could add all of the other, we had a bunch of other information. So in that case, it was useful to kind of like save it to our database as opposed to querying every time.
Yeah, that's a good example. Thanks, Tara. Jen.
That was an accident, but I'll ask my question anyway.
Okay, good.
Confirm then. So like it would make sense then if you're using an API for something that can change, like member in the government or like a teacher or something, that's where you would want to strictly just call to the API. But like what Taya was saying, it's like if you're looking into an API for like musical pieces, there is only ever going to be like one musical, like Moonlight Sonata, that won't ever change. So that's where it would be safe to save that into your database and then go from there, correct?
Yeah, if that's something that like you do want to store in your database instead of making that call, I think that is up to you. I would also say that you have to be careful too, and just like reading the docs of these APIs and make sure that it is okay that you store that information that you're getting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Let's go ahead. Let's do a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 18 and I'll decide what I want to do then. See ya. Okay, 18. Recording, great. All right, so great questions before we left. What we kind of left with before y'all took off is we started talking about kind of like why exactly are we using this data management? And I mentioned at one point that we're going to rename eventually to a facade. But before we get to that, just taking a look at like how can we continue refactoring this a little bit more? Looking at our search action. Our search action, we do have, so this Congress service, the JSON that we get from that, the data that we get from that, the only reason why we are calling it here is because we need to pass it to the find senator by last name. So I am going to go ahead and take this off, and I'm going to move this functionality of calling to the service, which means that we won't need this JSON passed anymore. I'm going to move this over to our data management and say, in order to find a senator by last name, I guess we won't need this as well. Go ahead and call to the service, get that information, create Senate members objects from it, and then go ahead and find the senator by their last name. So I pulled that line, this line right here, from the search action into our data management class, into that method there. Let's go ahead and run tests, see if I broke anything. Looks like that is still good. And again, let me go ahead and let's go ahead and rename this. So instead of data management, the pattern that we're working with is the facade service. I'm gonna call this, let's rename this facades. And let's also rename this file Congress facade, which means I'm gonna have to rename how I call it here, Congress facade. And same thing here. Let's run, make sure everything is all good still. Good. Okay, so I just renamed it. Cool. So let's go back to these slides. I want to talk, we refactored, about this like facade design pattern and what exactly we are trying to get out of pulling all of this that we had in the controller action first into the facade and having our facade call to our service and then manipulate our data. So what I think like the real world example that kind of like helps me think about it is the facade kind of being like an operator when you call somewhere. Like I have been working with Cigna Health Insurance for a while now, and every time I call, I give them like a very quick, this is what I'm working with, and then they can direct me where I need to go, instead of me like looking through a directory and finding where I need to go. So when I call them, they can say, okay, this is the problem we're working with. This is the contact that I need to connect you to. Let me go ahead and reroute you to that contact, so you can talk with them about whatever you need to talk about. So I think about the facade as kind of like abstracting out and like hiding away the complexities of my call. I didn't have to go someplace on the internet and to Cigna's website and look through all of their extensions to be able to get to exactly where I needed to go. I just called one person and then they directed me there. Everything behind the scenes, like them knowing where to direct me to, them knowing how to direct me there, that was taken care of by the operator. And I didn't see that. They took care of that for me. And so I would compare this to kind of like an operator setting. So they hide the complexities away from me. I didn't have to worry about it. They took care of that for me. Here's another diagram here to think about. Like if y'all are, let's think like ordering something online. You're at your computer, you go ahead and you order an item. So this action of like ordering something online, there's a lot that goes into ordering an item that you don't see. And so the facade is that like ordering an item, and the facade is what is going to take care of then looking at the stock, making sure it's in stock, grabbing your card, verifying it, and then running your payment or whatever else is included with creating an order online. So it's a level between the user and the complexities that have to happen within the application. The last kind of diagram I have here is a little bit more relevant, and I don't think I can write on this unless I just add text. I could do that. Okay. So I guess I kind of like to think of this as like, let's imagine, I guess kind of your controllers right here is what I'm thinking of. Like your controller calls the facade, just like, let's kind of go back here. My controller is calling this facade. And what the facade is doing is it's calling a method, and that method is taking care of a few things for me. It's taking care of the Congress service, gathering the data. It's taking care of creating Senate members. So there's another class that it's going to call out to. And then it's taking care of like finding what I needed to find for that call. So it's calling out in this case to Congress service and Senate member. So I would think of these two classes here as the service to be able to get that data, and the Senate member pull road to be able to convert it into objects. So the facade right here in the middle is kind of directing traffic of like what the complicated parts are of that request, so that we have this like simple layer right here that jumps into the complicated portions for you. Questions on kind of like reason for a facade, reason for this pattern? or anything. Any other questions? Noah.
Just to reiterate from my understanding, in terms of the API call, the way that I have this mapped out is that your service makes the API call. You have a Poro that creates objects, and the facade is managing any data manipulation of whatever objects you make in a Poro. Is that accurate?
Love it. Yeah. And I would think of this facade as like, when we talk about managing data, I think there's like two parts of that. It's gathering the data, like calling to get the data, and then manipulating that data however you need to. And that's exactly what's happening here. Like we're calling to get that data, and then we're going ahead and we're manipulating that data how we need to. And this here, I'm going to leave this like this. And if we have time at the end of class, this could also be like pulled out into other methods. We could keep pulling this out and making this a lot cleaner. But mainly what I want to focus on right now is just like what the facade's purpose is and what the services purpose is and why we're pulling them out into those. But if we have time at the end of class, then I can definitely walk through like other ways that we could refactor this and make this method a little bit smaller. Natia?
Two questions. One, can you use active record with poros or facades at all?
No, because it's not in your database.
And two, can you do anything where you have like class methods and instance methods in this context?
Since you have this here as a class method, any other method that you create, so like, I know I said I wasn't gonna do this, but if I were to make like, let's do this really quick. If I were to make another method here called all senators, and I put this conversion of like getting the results from that JSON, this is not exactly how I want to refactor this, but just for an example, and then creating the Senate members out of it. Let me run this to make sure this works. What do I do? All senators, there we go. So yeah, of course it's not going to work. So I made this an instance method, but since this was originally a class method, in order to call any other method that I call in here, every method in here is going to have to be a class method. Okay. You could, like, if you wanted to create or like create a new instance of the Congress facade, you could. It's just not, it's just that it's not really necessary to like initialize. Like essentially what we're doing with this method is we're just pulling out functionality. We're not necessarily like creating something that needs to start with state. So we're just pulling out that functionality into another method, into a place where we're encapsulating all of the actions that deal with that class. You could, like I said, you could do an instance method if you wanted to, but I prefer to use a class method since I didn't need to initialize this with state.
Okay, so I guess like to kind of expand upon my question, like specifically with the project, we have things that deal with like movies, all of them. We have things that deal with movie as like a single movie. So like, would you deal with that saying like funnel it all into like one poros, one facade, or would you say like two different things, two poros, two facades, or two poros, one facade, or like
what were the two that you're saying? Movies and movie?
You have all the movies, and then you have one movie, right? So how would you kind of?
I think it sounds like, I mean, I feel like you could do this a few different ways. But if you had a movie facade, let's say, and you had one call to get all of the movies, you would return a collection of movie objects. This one's just one. But if you had a call to just get information on one movie, then you could have a different method in here that is responsible for making the call to get one particular movie and then just returning one movie object. And I think with the workshop today, so the workshop is going to add to the Congress facade, so you might be able to see an example of that a little better. Any other questions right now? Molly?
I guess I'm curious about other like design patterns that we could look into, or like, because I think like I came like Aaliyah, like I came across like the gateway connection, which seems really similar to this versus like, I guess I'm wondering if there are other ones like, or if there's a lesson or something that has some resources on like analogous ones, or why Turing curriculum chose this one particularly?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think there's like, that's always valid for y'all to be like, why are we doing this way? And I think this is just like, seems to be the most common design pattern that we see when working in Rails. But yeah, there are a ton more. And what I would say is if you wanted to do some research, this is the facade service pattern is considered a structured pattern. There's like creation patterns and whatnot. But this one's considered to be a structured pattern. So what I would do is I would Google just like structured patterns for OOP. You're going to use structured patterns when you are working with OOP, but you can take a look at some of the other ones.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'll make a little note to myself to see if we do have any resources. I know that in the past we used to work a lot more with decorators, so I'm sure that we have some resources on that design pattern as well. So I'll take a look for y'all, and if I see anything, I'll post it in the thread.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Let me think if there's anything else that I want. I think what I would really like for y'all is to work on refactoring in this workshop. What I haven't gotten to at this moment, and I kind of started this class by saying like, I'm going to do this red-green refactor, use my tests to just like make sure that everything's passing and then backfill with tests. I think what I'm going to do instead of like running through those tests right now is I want to prioritize you all to refactor, refactor on your own. And sorry, hold on one second.
I hope it's a dog.
Dog just like walks into the room randomly. Okay. And what was I thinking? How do I want to handle this? Okay, let's do this. If you take a look at, let me pull up, actually, I think I have it in the slide deck. Yeah, so let me talk through this workshop. I'm gonna put y'all on like, I know we just came back from a break, but I need y'all to eventually, sorry, what do I want to do? Let me talk through this and then I'll talk about like how y'all can work on this. So there is this branch that I pushed up that has pretty much everything that I just refactored on the branch, as well as tests for the refactoring. Once I would like to come back and kind of like talk through those tests. But again, what I want you all to focus on is refactoring and pulling content within a code within a controller action and pulling it into facade and service. Excuse me. So to do that, I'm going to have you all pull down this refactor workshop start branch. And let me go ahead and let me switch to that. I have it down here already. And what's it? Okay, cool. So yeah, I have everything that we did in class is on this branch, other than I did add more tests into this for specifically for facade, specifically for that pull row, and specifically for that service. So y'all can feel free to take a look at those, and I'll kind of talk through those at the end of class. Let me run this, make sure everything is good to go. Good. Okay. The thing that you'll notice is new when you pull this down is there is new functionality in here. And the functionality is, I guess, I feel like I should have named this a little differently. Let me run through what this functionality is. So let's go ahead and spin up our server and take a look at localhost. And this is what we had before, search for Senate members. And what I added in here is search for a House members of a specific state. So I can go into a little bit more about like how I created this, but mainly I want you all to focus on the controller action and pulling this into facade and service. But let's say I selected Alabama. When I search by state, I can go ahead and I can see that House members, and all of the House members of that state are listed there. Not pretty, but that's the functionality that's been added. If we take a look at the code just to kind of like run through what exactly is happening and what you have available to you, I want to take a look at this. I think like first place that I would start when looking at new code is take a look at the test. And in the test, we can kind of get an idea for like what is happening here. So I do have this fixture data that I'm using with the test, and y'all will be pulling this down. And it is stubbed out. Cool. Okay, so when they select a state from the dropdown and search by state, then we're getting that information from those House members. Taking a look at, where is this appearing in our index on our dashboard page? I think it's on our welcome. Cool, yeah. So this is what is new on the index, welcome index page, is I added this form here. And what might be a little different than what we've seen before is in this form, I have the prompt for searching for House members of a specific state. I put this select in here, and this US states, it looks like it's a local variable. What this is, let me go ahead and just like search this whole entire project. We can see that I created this states helper, which is where all of this has been defined. This isn't like, I don't really need y'all to like know all this, but I just want you to know like what the code is that you are inheriting, where this is coming from. So this is something that I created, and it's just relating a state with its abbreviation. And so the state is what comes on the dropdown, but what actually gets sent over is going to be the abbreviation for the state. And then if we take a look back here, so this is going, once we select the state and we hit search by state, we're going to this search state path. If we take a look at our routes, this search state path is going to the Congress controller search action. And so in here, this like search state, we're kind of starting now with where we started in the last one. And I probably named this a little bit different, but it's all pulled out the same as we did in class. So with this action, we're grabbing that state that came in. It's an abbreviation. We're making that call to the API with that particular state. So there's our service. And here too. And then over here, we are gathering all the results and passing them off to the search state view as this House member instance variable. Search state, I have a view for that. And this currently is just like raw JSON. So what I'm expecting for y'all to do is I want you all to go about the same process that we did. Let me go ahead and bring this up again. The same process here of let's create objects to send to the view. Let's separate the portions that have like their own logical sections. So let's go ahead and pull out that service call. And then if there's any data manipulation, which in this case, you're just gathering everything. So you're just going through and creating member objects, House member objects. And so in this case, the data manipulation is truly just like converting that raw JSON into House member objects, and then giving that back to the controller to render to the view, to give to the view. So I think I just said a lot right now. I know this is new functionality. What I want this to look like for the next 50 minutes, let's say, is I'm gonna let you all choose how you wanna do this. If you would like to go out on your own and do this, you're welcome to jump off the call, pull down that branch and work on it on your own. If you would like to work in pairs, I'm going to ask you all once our on your owners go away, if you would like to work in pairs, I'm going to ask you all to just like give me a thumbs up or a yes, and then I'll go ahead and put you into pairs and breakout rooms. But if you want to stay and like do it with me and talk through it, then I'll stay on this call and y'all can stay in the main room. Any questions on kind of like how I want the next 50 minutes to go? Okay, if you are working on your own and you happen to have questions, or if you decide that you want to just like pop in and watch me do it, then you can definitely pop in at any time as well. We'll just be on this call. So let's go ahead and do that. If you would like to hop off and do this on your own, we are going to come back at 11. Let's come back at 11:30 is when you can expect to come back if you're choosing to hop off of this call. 11:30. Okay. Let me. Cool. If you are on this call and would like to work in a pair with somebody, have a smaller group, can you go ahead and just give me a yes in the participants channel, participants page? Okay, cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up breakout rooms and just allow you all to jump into them on your own. Right now, it looks like, I think y'all can see participants who has said yes or no. I think some of them went away. Do they go away after a certain time? I think I saw Lawrence, Mark, and Noah maybe.
Alicia as well.
Alicia, cool. Let's go ahead then. I'll go ahead and. So from those 4 people, do y'all want to work in a group of 4? Or do you want 2 groups of 2?
4 seems fine.
Anyone else have thoughts? Okay. I'll go ahead and let you all go ahead and opt into room 1 then. And if you all decide that you want to break it up and do other groups, then you can choice into other rooms. How's that sound? Cool. So if you want to be in a smaller group, just working on your own, working with a few other people. Currently, it looks like there's just 4 of y'all that would like to do that. So go ahead and jump into room 1 and y'all can work together on this. And if at any time anyone else on here wants to jump into a smaller group with someone else, you're welcome to. All right. Cool. So I guess everyone else here wants to do this together, which I'm fine with. I think I kind of expected a lot of people to stay on. But I also like, since you all are here, I think the reason probably why you're here so that you can like ask questions and see like, see it get done. But I want you all to like also keep asking questions. I think that's like the biggest part. If you're going to stay on for more clarification, definitely don't hesitate to ask those questions. All right. Lee.
2 things. 1, I don't see an option for the breakout rooms.
Thank you. I didn't open them. There you go.
And then my other question is, I just switched to the other branch. I tried to do a get fetch. I tried to do a get pull. Everything was up to date, and I'm getting an error around the stubbing. I didn't touch it this time though, so you know.
Around the stubbing. Let's go ahead. I feel like I might know what it is. Can you share your screen again? Let me stop sharing. Go ahead.
Oh, yep. Nope. I'm trying to leave the meeting. Sorry.
Okay. Hold it down. Okay. So I mean, we're using webmock. Since we allowed webmock in our gem file, it doesn't allow us to make any HTTP requests. And I wonder if what you're stubbing out isn't something that matches within your code, then the webmock won't work. Can we do this? Can you go ahead and actually, let's see. So this is for state house members, ProPublica API. Joe. And can you do this? Can you take off all of the like the with headers? That's not, we don't really need that because really we just want to say like when this comes through, stub it out with the response. Yeah, go ahead and take all of that off. And then, yeah, so dot to return. Go ahead and save that and let's run that. There we go. I think if you scroll up a little bit, I think what it wanted you to do, and it just might be on the settings that you have or a version that you have, is it wanted you to change the headers because the headers didn't match, but it will automatically like assign the headers that you need when looking for that call. So the headers aren't necessary. All we're saying, and when we're stubbing this out, is like whenever you see a request that goes to this endpoint, just give it the JSON response.
Okay, cool. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I ran into that quite a bit when getting this set up as well. All right, any other questions before we get started?
What's the branch name again? Sorry.
You're good. The branch name is this refactor workshop start. Okay, can y'all see my text editor at the moment? Thank you. Thanks, Lee. Awesome, let me go ahead and I have to check that out again. Okay. All right, so taking a look at this action, oops, keep breakout rooms open, yes. Taking a look at this action, going through that, like what I had before on the other branch was, let's like turn JSON into objects for our view. And then let's also encapsulate and abstract logic chunks. And in this case, taking a look at those logic chunks, we're looking at this call to our API. And then the data management, like we don't really see it here, but eventually we are going to have to do something with like managing or like how to, with turning these objects into, or turning the JSON into objects. So I'm going to put here the service, so call to the API, and also the facade, which is going to take care of managing our data to return to the view. Is that really loud for y'all? Yep. No? Okay. Gosh, what is happening? Oh, we're removing a tree, in case you wanted to know. That's what's happening in the back there. Okay, so y'all sure that's okay? Okay, maybe it's just me that is bothered. Cool, so first thing I want to do here is I want to make objects to send to the view instead of sending this JSON. So how do I want to do this? I think what I want to do is I want to just put a pry here and see what I'm working with at the moment with this @house members, just kind of familiarize myself. So let's run this. And take a look at where I am. If I take a look at @house members, then I can see that I have an array that has results. So it has a bunch of objects in it, and every single object is its own house member data. So taking a look then again at the, not the spec, the search state HTML, this one here. So what we're doing here is we're essentially using this data that I just put a pry in to take a look at. And since it's an array, we're iterating through. So we're saying @housemembers.each. And for each house member's data, which is this like hash-like object here, we are grabbing their name, their role, their party, and their district. That's everything that we want to present on this search state page. So let's get rid of doing this with JSON, and let's go ahead here and let's say, let's grab these results and let's map through them. And every element of that array is house member data. And what I want to do is I want to create an object so that I can send objects to the view instead of JSON. And before, my Poro was Senate member. I'm going to call this house member. They have different, and this is just like from experience with the API. At first, when I did this, I'll give you like a little background on when I was first doing this. I just created a member Poro, thinking like, okay, Senate member, house member, I should be able to just wrap that into a member object, but they do come back with different data and different keys. So just from experience, that's kind of why I went the route originally of creating a specific Senate member Poro versus like a broad member Poro. So I'm going to create a house member Poro, and I want to pass it the house member data. And so let's go ahead and let's get out of here. Let's go ahead and create in our Poros a house member.rb file. And so thinking about like, what do I want to initialize this plain old Ruby object with? Let's go ahead and let's take a volunteer. What information do I need? Do I want to store with each of these objects? What do I need in order for my view to display what I want it to display? Alex?
Don't you need like the name, role, party, district?
Yeah, exactly. And it might be that I want more from this API later, or I want to initialize house member objects with more data from the API. But for right now, working with what I know that I want, I know I only want those 4 attributes. So I'm just going to allow those when I initialize a house member. And I can always come back and add more state to the house member Poro when I want to. So let's go ahead and initialize with house member data. And in here, again, this is when I am accessing, when I'm here, when I'm creating this house member, I have access to this hash object that has all of that house member's information. So I can access it like a hash. So similar to before, how I did voice crack, Senate member.rb. I'm just going to access this and say like the role is, and then go ahead and access that hash. Let me use this as a reference though. So name is what I want, and I want it to be house member data. Go ahead and access name attribute or name key. I also want a role and a party and a district. Let's go get ahead and make a way to read this data. So name, role, party, district. All right. Go ahead and run it. We get one failure. Our failure is that we don't know how to access house member anymore with this like hash syntax by accessing a key. So we need to change this to use our object. This is happening in our HTML. So if we go ahead and pull up this over here, we can see it's having this issue here with like house member : name. So I'm going to grab this, see if I can make this pretty. No, I'm not going to. Dot name. Yes. There we go. Okay, that's always fun. And accessing it as an object. And this looks like we're good to go now. We're working. Love it, Alex. Love the facial expression. Thank you. Cool. So we are done with step 1 here. Turn JSON into objects for the view. Next thing that we want to do here is encapsulate and abstract out those logic chunks. So again, that's the service and the facade. So taking a look let's actually, yeah, let's take the same approach that we did before. I think I like taking this approach of just like pulling it apart and then like combining it later. I think the more that y'all work with this design pattern, I think it'll be more intuitive to like start right away with the service, or start right away with the facade and then go ahead and create the service. But we have all of the code we want in this action. So I'm just gonna pull it into different classes. So looking at this first part, I would consider everything up here. This is kind of just like pulling in something from my parameter or something from my params to be able to make, looks like the state is used for the endpoint to be able to get the house members for a particular state. So when I do pull this out into a service, I am going to have to pass that parameter. Let me go ahead and copy this. And again, dream driving a little bit. Let's have a, we already have a Congress service for calling to this service. So I'm going to go ahead and call that Congress service again. Service. And this time what I want to do is I want to get house members. So let's say house, and it's by a particular state. House members by state. So in my Congress service, let's go ahead and create a new class method called house members by state. And I'm going to paste it all in there. So we have the connection happening. We get our response. So this, I don't know if we've seen this syntax before. This might be new to some of us. And this is nice because it'll help us kind of refactor our service a little bit later. What this is doing here is it's allowing us to like make a connection to the service. And then what we can do once we abstract this out, we could put this into its own method, is we can then go ahead and like, we can dry up our code by saying like, okay, the service that we need is the ProPublica service. So put this into its own method, and then you can call separate endpoints on that connection. We can get into refactoring that a little bit later, but again, just pulling this out into the service for now. So pulled it out into a class method, gonna run my test, see what I'm at. I have a failure. It's saying undefined local method or variable or method state for Congress service class. And kind of going back to what we were talking about with this search state action, is the reason why we have this on line 7 is so that we can make the call to our service and pass along the state that we're looking for house members from. So this data is relevant, is needed for this action to take place. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to say, let's pass it. Let's just say params state. Let's get rid of this. And in my service, I'm going to have a place here to take in state. So now I should have access to whatever state that I am searching for. Let's run it again. Failure. Okay, so it looks like in our Congress controller line 9, it's having some trouble with this JSON method or variable. So this JSON, what I'm looking for to go into the results, I'm looking for the response from the service. So I'll go ahead and just call this JSON again, and hopefully then it knows what to call results on. Great, we're back to green. We've refactored into a service. And the next step here is my facade. So the facade is, what we're doing with the facade is managing our data. This eventually, this service, I'm going to want to pull that into my facade. Remember, if we think back to like, what is the facade for? What is this facade's purpose? It's to kind of like abstract away and to hide the complexities that are happening. One of those complexities is that call to the service. So I'm going to let my facade be responsible for not only calling to the service and getting data back, but also doing whatever I like, manipulating that data that I get back and handing it back to the controller to be able to present to the view. So in our case, we're going to call to the service, the Congress service. And then what we want to do with that data is we want to take that data, that house member data, and we want to go ahead and pass it off to our pull row and create objects out of it so we can return an array of objects to our view. So let's go ahead, let's grab this. This is our data management here. I'm going to get rid of this and say, let's have house members be our Congress facade dot, let's call, okay, so what are we trying to do? We're trying to get house members by state. Essentially, we're trying to do the same thing that like our service is doing. We're just trying to get like the objects back with this facade. I think I'm just going to rename this so that it's a little bit easier for me to differentiate. I'm just going to call this house members. And then what I'm trying to do with this facade, I'm going to call this find all house members by state. Kind of long, but tells me what I'm doing. And let's go ahead in our Congress facade then, and let's create that class method. Find all house members by state. And I'm going to paste what I just cut out from my controller. Kind of like taking a little step forward. I'm not going to run my test yet. We've talked about like, let's pull this service into our facade, since our facade should be responsible for making that call to get our data and also manipulating it. So I'm going to grab this service. I'm going to cut it out from my action. And I'm going to go ahead and just put this into my facade class method. The one thing that I'm going to have to change up here, again, I don't have access to params within a plain old Ruby object. I only have access to params within a controller. So here I'm going to have to, instead of calling param state, I'm going to have to pass that to my facade instead of like before I was passing it to my service. So I'm going to change this up and say, let's pass this to my facade. And then my facade is going to take in a state and get the house members for that particular state. Let's go ahead and run this. We have one failure. Let's see what we have. Testing something. That's funny, that just popped up. Let's see which one it's looking at. I guess I did put headers in.
That was the same one, that specific test that it was like unhappy about with me.
Let's take a look at it. So this is from my search member spec. Nope, that's a Poro spec. Let me just look at them. Like, what did I call this? In my spec, I have features, I believe is where I put it. For Congress, I have this search state house spec. Okay. Is this the one? Search state house spec. 120, search by state. It tries to call to that API. And it's giving me, like, Webmock is nice. It gives me a suggestion on what to put. I'm going to try and just take out the headers here. And let's run this. Same thing. Congress B1 members house CO. Am I calling? Interesting. Okay. Oh, okay. It looks like it's suggesting this, at least like from what I'm trying to debug right now. It looks like it's suggesting that I stub out this path, which doesn't include the state. So I'm wondering if for some reason that like state abbreviation isn't getting passed to my service the way that I want it to, because it's not even showing up here. But down here, it like shows me that I am stubbing it out with that CO, but that's why it's having an issue because it can't find CO. So let's do a little debugging. Not too sure what's going on, but we'll figure it out. So find all house members by state. We have, oh, that's it. Param search is what I just put here instead of param state. So it wasn't actually finding the state. It came out as nil, which is why that was empty here. Let's run it and see. There we go. Okay. Any questions on my error there, my typo, or why that happened? I just selected the wrong param. Okay. We have this pulled out into a facade. We have it pulled out into a service. Let's go ahead. Let me open it up. What questions do y'all have at this moment? Alex?
It's not so much a question, but can you just really quickly, if possible, just like do the thing that you did in the beginning where you're like, this connects to this, connects to this, connects to that, perchance?
With this feature?
Yes.
Yeah, totally. You're talking about like when I went to here, like what, like the code behind this?
Yeah, like what? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. And now it's going to be a little different since we've pulled it out, which I think that'll be good that we're doing this. So let's go back to let's start at our welcome index. And our welcome index has this new form is what I had added into this branch. And so what this form is doing is we're giving it a path to post to. It's going to be posting to pull the routes. It's going to be posting to this path right here. Here's our search state path. And this action that it's going to is the search state action in the Congress controller. That's eventually where it's going to go once we hit search by state. Before that, though, we have the label and the select. So the label is just saying search for house member by specific state, this guy right here. And then we have the select here, which we're giving it the field of state is how it's going to come through with our params. That's where we define that. This US states, this is a helper method that I have. And if we go ahead and pull up US states, this is just something that I added in for like ease of selecting. I could have also just asked that like someone wrote in the abbreviation, but just for the ease of this class, I just put this in here so that we could have a nice way to select it and practice it or try it out. Also, like the reason why I have it looking like this for being able to select is because this is a little bit more user-friendly. Not everyone knows what AL stands for, but kind of looking ahead, and this is just like from my experience with this API, I know that when making this call to get house members, and this is just like digging into the API, we didn't really do that in class, but the code that you have came with the endpoint. But looking at this service call for house members, in order to get house members, it needed to have the state, and in the docs, it showed that it needed to be the abbreviation. So that's why I have my helper coming through as like a user-friendly relating to just the abbreviation to kind of help me out down the line. Yeah, and that's like something that we did not do together. So I understand if that's like a little confusing, but again, mainly just focusing on the refactor here. So yeah, so then we hit search by state, which that takes us to our Congress controller search state action. So over here, let's do our Congress controller. We take a look at our search state, and the first and only thing that we have in here is we're assigning whatever comes from this to @house members. So the first thing that's going to run is going to our Congress facade and going to this find all house members by state method. and we're passing it the state for which we're trying to find the house members. The reason why I'm passing it the state is because I know that in order to make my call to my service, I need access to that parameter that came through from the form. So taking a look at the facade, going to this find all house members, it's this one right here. In the facade, my facade is responsible for gathering data and manipulating it, kind of like hiding away that complexity. So it calls to my service to get the house members. Let's go ahead and pull up the service again. There we go. And it calls house members, it passes the state. So then this house members class method, what it's doing here is it's calling to the ProPublica API, making that connection here. And then it's going to the specific endpoint that the docs mentioned I need to go to in order to get house data for a current state or a particular state. And then it's also getting that, oh yeah, here, getting that response and parsing it so that it is in a structure, a hash-like structure that we can then create objects out of. The reason why we're parsing that JSON, or parsing that response, is so that we can create JSON out of it, because JSON's a lot easier to work with. So that's all that gets sent back. We get raw JSON back to us at this point right here. And we're taking that JSON, we're jumping into the results. The JSON at this point just looks like this. But what I want is all of this information that came from results. So jumping into the results value, and I'm mapping through that. So the results is an array of house member data. And so with each of that house member data that I'm iterating through, I'm creating a new house member object so that I can send off objects to the view. Since this is the last line of our method here, that's what's going to get returned and stored into this house members. But with each like chunk of data, each JSON object that has that particular house member data, it's going to get passed to the house member pull row. And in here, we still have access to everything with this house member data. Like at this point, let's make this bigger. House member data, I'm calling this right here, is everything, all the data that's associated with that particular house member, but I'm only pulling out the information that I want to store as state for this house member object. And the only thing that I was trying to display to the page was name, role, party, and district. So those are the only things that I decided to store as state within this pull row. And then since that went through all of the house members, created house member objects, that was mapped. So it goes ahead and it gets returned to the search state method and stored into this at house members, which then later gets search state house, search state HTML, which later we render using this template. Thanks for that question. Thanks for having me go through it. I appreciate it. Mattia?
So if you don't want to display, I don't know, points of an object in a view ever, would you do away with the poros but keep the facade?
I would say if it's still something, is it something that you want to track still? Like so something that you want your internal application to know about?
Like you want to consume it for a different facade. Like if you want to, right, create a facade that takes data from other APIs and like puts it together for a view, would you just say like facade to a parent facade to the view without the poros for the?
I think I need to understand what you're saying. You're saying like if you need multiple data points from multiple API calls.
Yeah, let me like put this in context. It'll make it really clear
Yeah,
for
go ahead.
everybody. So I'm specifically like trying to like put this in my brain for like, how do we use this structure for the project? And right now in my project, I have a movies like details that takes the cast data, the movie data, the review data, the genre data, and like puts it all together in one nice object called like movie data, right? And now I have like one object and I can call all the things off of it. But I don't care about the cast data. I just care about the movie details, right? So like if I don't care about the cast data, like keeping that, showing that, I want to like translate it into this combined object that has it all. Would I ever store the cast data as a poros to begin with, or would I just use the facade to get the data I want and pass that to the movie details facade or object?
I think my answer is going to be like most of mine are, like it depends on what exactly you might need cast for later. I think you could create your own. So at this point right now, Natia, you're saying that you don't have a cast poro.
I do, but I'm thinking about deleting it and replacing it with a facade, because like my poro, all it does is like finds me the top 10, right? And like cuts off the rest, which is data manipulation, which according to what I'm hearing doesn't belong in a poro, it belongs in a facade.
Mm-hmm.
And then my like movie details facade now, or probably poros, because I want that object.
Yeah.
Goes and gets that data from this facade and like stores it as part of the movie details object. So like, is there ever a need to keep the cast data as an object if I just want that manipulated data set and like, I don't care about the rest of the cast data, it's just a calculation?
I think you still want to, I would still have it like, if you need to access anything from that cast, I would still have it stored as an object somehow. And you would make that call to store it as an object somehow in the facade. So the facade should be what like gathers all the data you need in order to, let's say like your movie details page, you hit a class method in your facade. It goes ahead and it makes a call to get that movie information. And then once you have that data for the movie, go ahead and create an object that you would need in order to present information to the view. And that object can also hold other objects within it.
Okay, so you would have a cast object, a cast facade, and then my like combined facade object would just get the object from the cast poros.
I'm not saying that's what I would do, but I'm saying I think you could do it that way.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Lee.
I just have a question around naming, and I just think it'll help me kind of understand the point of it a little bit more. But in the Congress service, under the House members, we have on line 10, it's labeled con. Is that like standing for connection? What does it like stand for?
Yeah, totally. That is standing for connection. Let's take a look at this. Let me get rid of everything and let's talk about refactoring this a little bit. We've pulled it into our service. And thinking back to like the warm up that we had done, we talked about this principle of like being dry, not repeating yourself. And I mentioned this will probably come back when we start adding multiple endpoints that we need to hit within our facade or within our service. And so in this case, like we have two different times we're making a connection to the ProPublica.org API. But the only difference is that we're calling to different endpoints. So this, I don't know that we've necessarily seen this syntax, but what we can do with this is like we're opening up the connection. And then what this is doing is it's making a GET request to that specific endpoint from that to that connection. So yeah, this con is just short for connection. What we could do is we could say, let's go ahead and make like a con or connection. We could call, I think like I commonly see it as con. And what this class could be responsible for is just making that connection that any API call that I make with these is going to go to this like base connection here. And then I can go ahead and get rid of that in, well, I guess I don't have it necessarily in this one, but what I could do is mimic how we're doing it here and say response is equal to con.get. The endpoint that we're trying to go to here is /congress members.json. And so we're calling upon the connection down here, dried up our code, pulled it into its own method, and calling to this specific endpoint. So pulling out the connection, that's one thing we could do to dry it up. Lee, does that answer your question around naming, or does it bring up any other questions?
So many other questions, but in a good way. But yes, it does help. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that we could definitely pull out, and I know I mentioned this earlier, is since we want to work with JSON, we want to parse our response body to be able to pass off to, in our case with our facades, we're passing it off to a Poro to be able to create objects out of. But in order to do that, we have to parse our response body, and these are identical. So what we could do here is we could say like parse JSON. Let's go ahead and pass it the response. And then let's go ahead and make a parse JSON class that takes in a response and you don't even need to save it into a variable here. Takes in the response, parses the response body, so returns the parse JSON. We could even take it a step further. We could also say like, let's go ahead and parse this. Now we're getting into like, is this actually readable? So I think for me, I kind of prefer to leave it like this at this point of like, go ahead and get the response and then parse it. That just helps me to see what I'm doing, but you could also like put that all into one line. Let me run it again. Cool. And I guess that brings up like, how else could we change up and like refactor this facade? There's a lot going on here. I think I started doing this before we broke into groups, but we could like pull this into a method to get all of our senators. We could say like all senators here, have a class method for all senators. Where in here, we could then make the call to the service. Get the results, iterate through, and create Senate member objects. So a lot of ways to like pull this out into smaller chunks. And I could even maybe like pull this out into another one and just like get the senator information and then pass it off to get all senators. But I feel like I'm okay with this, like calling to the service and getting that information to turn into Senate members. Yeah, different options. I could also do the same thing here and pull this and just say like, go ahead, get that service, get that information from the service, go into results and make House member objects. Again, then you kind of sacrifice readability, but a lot of options there with refactoring within that class. We've been going for about 50 minutes. People are going to start coming back at around 11:30. Let's go ahead, let's take a break and let's come back when everyone else does at 11:30. Can I get just a yes or a no in the participants panel? And if you stayed with me, you can go ahead and put a yes on it since we got through refactoring. But can you give me a yes if you were able to refactor this search state action and a no if you are unable to complete it. This does not include testing. Just if you're able to refactor it, keep your test screen. Khan's just trying out every single reaction he can right now. All right, y'all, thank you. Cool. I guess, I know I had about like 12 people that finished up with me. So it was a good chunk of y'all, and we were able to get through refactoring, and we also kind of ran through and talked through kind of just the sequence of the code. And I think if it's all right, I feel like that's still good to review. What I want to do is I'm going to share my screen again, talk through how we refactored it, and then I want to open it up for any questions that anyone that was with me or in breakout rooms or on their own, whatever questions y'all had, we can go ahead and make a space for that. So jumping back to the Congress controller, this is how we eventually got our Congress controller looking. Originally, we had everything in here from calling to our service and parsing that data. And then this is actually new code too, and just sending off those results to the view. What we ended up with, go all the way back, there we go, is just one line in here, just like we did with the search action. And this one line is calling to our facade first. Again, just kind of reviewing this design pattern. We're gonna utilize our facade to hide those complexities. So we're calling to the facade, just one call, and the facade then will be responsible for calling to whatever it needs to do in order to gather the information and manage it. Might be more than 2 classes. That's just an example of 2. So we have the facade, nice and pretty, looks very simple right here. But then we go ahead and we can open up our Congress facade and take a look at the method that we have here. And we went ahead and we started refactoring this a little bit, as well as the service. You'll see we started refactoring. So for this method, find all house members by state, it's down here. What we did is we're calling to this, I guess we can like kind of think of this in 2 different parts. What we could do, just to see it a little bit better, is say that, okay, the first step here is calling to get that information, that data from the service. And then we go ahead and we create house members. House member objects from that. Let's take a look into the service. So in the Congress service, we're calling house members. And again, we've kind of refactored this a little bit, but we can take a look at house members, takes in a state, since our endpoint that we're trying to hit requires us to put in state. And so what this is doing in here is we're calling con, which is a method that I created. And con, short for connection. It's common practice to see it used to just create the connection to the service. And then you can create different requests off of that connection by using this get verb here. So con is just opening up the connection between our application and the ProPublica API. And then we're calling our request get to this specific endpoint, which was found in the API docs. We didn't really go into the API docs for this, but for this story. But yeah, this is the one that we grabbed to be able to get all the house members for a particular state. And once I get that response back, then I call to this other helper method that I created, pass it the response. And this method, this parse JSON method, what it's responsible for doing is taking that response and parsing it, sending back JSON. The reason why I kind of abstracted these out into their own methods is because we were doing that essentially in both the get Senate members and the House members action. If we kind of go back in time. Right there. So although the syntax was a little bit different, this one used the connection first and then called the get off of the connection. This one immediately just called to the API endpoint that we were reaching. So I took the connection out from both of them and created this con method, put the connection in there and took it out of the house members. And then also refactored the get Senate members to include using the con method. And then what we did a little bit further to refactor, oh, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, I've seen the parsing and the con methods put into a private section. Can you go into what the benefit would be if that was a private method?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good practice to put it into a private method, since it's just like, since we're abstracting it away from the actual API call. It's kind of just like the practice that we do when we have helper methods within any class. So we just put them in private methods as kind of the practice that we've had. And I think that would be fine to do here. The reason why it would be helpful here is this makes it so that only the Congress service class can access that connection. So I wouldn't be able to connect to that API from any other class, or use this method, use this con method from any other class. So that's what that private method allows us to do, is it allows us to just keep that method within that class. Let me go ahead and pull back this, oh no, I might have gone too far. I think I did, it's okay.
Before you get rid of the private method, can I ask you to do something?
Yeah.
Can you run Rubocop? And when I
Rubocop.
put my self.con in a private method, I got a Rubocop error. Oof, now it's gonna be, okay, that might be a bit much. The error I got was saying that using private doesn't work for self dot methods.
Let's try it. Yeah, because I don't think I have put it in a private before, but I'm curious now with it there.
Yeah, the putting it in private is what I learned last year. But when I ran Rubocop, it became angry at me.
Does anyone want to unmute if they understand?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I know how to make Rubocop be happy with that.
Who's this? Is this Rich? Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Because it took me a little bit to figure that out too. At the very bottom of this class, you have to get rid of private.
Yes.
But at the very bottom of the class, you want to put private underscore class underscore method. Like within the class.
Okay.
Within the class, yeah.
Within self.com. Okay.
Yep, just like this. And then you want to define each method. It's going to be on the same line because this is a method. Each parameter is going to be a symbol of the name of the method you wish to be private. And then that's it. And then Rubocop will be happy.
Interesting.
And that effectively makes that method private as well. I don't know why. I think it's just to make it clean looking.
Yeah. Yeah, there's.
Do you know why private doesn't work on class method?
It does work. It's just Rubocop doesn't like the style of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I mean, we just ran our test too with the private there. And I didn't have it like flagging me. I didn't check Rubocop to see that, but yeah, Rubocop will yell at you if it's a syntax that it doesn't love for that occasion. Kevin, I see your hand up. Did you have another question? Okay. The other way that I just like went a little too far. First, JSON, I'm going to pull this into. This, and I see it. Molly, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious about, I know in our project, we have cases where we're calling, like making multiple requests in the same, and like we need to return it in the same thing. And I guess I'm just curious about like convention for that. So like, I think we at least did it with like different pages. We called the API twice for like getting all the data. And I'm just like, was curious about whether that's like unconventional or like, would you do it in the same method or like, yeah, I'm just curious if you can say something about that. Cause I feel like it made ours look kind of like different than this.
Can you give me an example of what you're saying right now? I think I have an idea.
Yeah, so like in one of ours, we called the API twice to get like data from the first page and data from the second page. And so we wanted to return it together as one thing. But then it meant like putting some quote unquote data manipulation in here because we only want the results section from each of them. So instead of like, I guess it didn't make sense to me to combine them here with like parse JSON response and then have to do that in the other one. But is that like proper because it would separate it that way?
Yeah, in the case of that API, like you do need to make separate calls depending on the pages. And so unless the API like gave you an option that didn't use pagination, then I would think that it would be up to you to manipulate that and combine it. And I don't know that I necessarily answered your question with that though.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious less about how it works, or like less about how than about where. So like in this, like if we do parse JSON response and we added like parse JSON response plus parse JSON response or whatever, added them together that way as JSON, then you have to like dive into the data a different way versus like doing some of that manipulation here and returning a JSON object that is partly manipulated. And like, is that, I'm guessing like, I'm just curious because it seems to be like in the gray area between the jobs that these two different things are doing.
Yeah, totally. I think where I would put that is in the facade, mainly because like what I'm looking at with this service is like, just give me the data. Just give me the data. And then I can figure out in the facade a way to combine that together. But I think that like manipulation of combining the data together would be at the facade level.
So would you return like an array of 2 JSON objects then? Like how would you pass that? Because you'd have 2 different things that you need to return from the method. Like what's conventional to do that, I guess?
I think ideally, let's do this. Let's say you had a method where we're getting the movies or something like that. And you made one call for movies like for page 1, let's say. And then you're saying like we have to make another one for page 2. Is this okay to kind of like think of it this way?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're calling to the API twice in this case to get that information. And then before even creating movie objects, I would find a way to combine the responses there.
Yeah.
I think I lost you.
I think I understand why you're doing it that way. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry if you want to follow up more with, maybe I might not be fully understanding your question more. And if that's the case, we can definitely chat more on it.
Okay. Yeah, I can follow up and code out, but I think actually this answers the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Molly. All right, y'all. Any other questions on refactoring? Taya?
Sorry. I was wondering when we do the specs and refactor the specs for how it's set up here, when we're using WebMock, is there a way to, how do we do a helper method for specs?
Yeah, great question. And that's actually, I was, the last like chunk of time that we had here, I wanted to just run through. I didn't write tests for the refactor that y'all did in the workshop, but the code that you pulled down for the workshop did have tests for the code that we wrote in the beginning of class. So I just want to take a look at those. And if we even just take a look at the tree here, let's get rid of all this. Let's take a look at spec. What you might have noticed if you looked at the spec is I added a folder for facades. So I have a Congress facade spec. I also added a folder for POROs, and I also added a folder for services. So we mentioned at the beginning of class, like red, green refactor. I had something working, let's refactor, get that code to work. And then let's go ahead and backfill with tests. Reason being, yes, these tests are still passing, but since I have abstracted this out into their own classes, there are more dependencies in this case. So we want to make sure that those dependencies are still working the way that we expect them to. So I just want to open these up and kind of like run through what I kind of expect when y'all are testing this refactor. Oops. So with the member the Poro spec. Let's pull up the Senate member. So switching gears to Senate, the original, what we did this morning. And really what I think of with the Poro test is obviously like I do want, like if you had other methods within this Poro, you would have to test them just like you would test any method that would be in a model, make sure that those are working. But mainly what I'm looking for in this one, and I took this data from, I just made a call via Postman, grabbed data for a Senate member. Actually, I think I even just pulled it from my fixture data, because what I'm expecting to get passed to the Senate member is an object of data, an object that has that Senate member data. So I have that in here in my test as just like an example here. And I'm checking when I say Senate member.new and I pass it that hash here, does it know first name, last name, Twitter account? So kind of going back to mod 1, just making like that unit testing and making sure that the Senate member was created how I expected it to be created. And if you had more code in the Senate member, if you had other methods that you needed, you could also go ahead and test those in this spec. The other new spec that we had, let's take a look at the service spec. Pull this up. Okay. And I'm not really checking each individual method that I've refactored into. I'm checking, and it's tough to let's pull this open. Mainly what we're checking with testing the service is that, and I think probably like, I know we've been using WebMock. We haven't really talked too much about VCR. I would say VCR is, I'd say it's more accurate than using WebMock, because WebMock is essentially using your fixture, whereas VCR is going to make the call once and then store that information. So just that as like a side note there, that like really what we're doing here is I've like mocked out a call and I have that like expected JSON that is going to get handed back to me. I have that in a fixture data file. And what I'm checking is just the kind of the structure of what I would get back. So what I have here is when I make that Congress service get Senate members call, what I'm checking is that the response is a hash. If I take a look, and like what I would have done when creating this test is like in here, I go to create this call to the ProPublica API for Senate members, and I can take a look at like what I get back here. And I just am testing the structure of the response. So I'm checking to make sure it's a hash. The thing that I'm like really curious, or like really want to make sure is the way that I want it to be, is I want to make sure that within my results and within my members that I have the keys that I'm looking for, that I need for my functionality to work, the values that I need to appear on my view. So you'll notice when I go back to the test, the main things that I'm testing here are that a key is present and like the data type of that. So what I needed for the Senate members was their first name, their last name, and their Twitter account. And I want to confirm that those all come through as strings. So what I've tested in here is the structure of it, making sure it's a hash, that response that I get back. I'm checking, what do I have here? Expect that like the members, when I jump into the members, that's an array. And then I save this into like the member info, because that's really what I want to check the keys and the values, the data types of. I save that into a variable here. I'm checking to make sure that the keys are present and that I know what data type to expect for those specific keys. For this facade, the facade is, where are we? There we go. Again, for finding the one Senate member by their last name. We are stubbing this out using our fixture data. And I am calling to the facade. What I want returned from that method is a Senate member object. And I can also just check to make sure it is the Senate member that I'm expecting. We could go into more detail here and like check for other senators by last name because maybe I also want to make sure that it's not returning like the very first one all the time. Baldwin was the first one. So just some examples here of testing practices when you do refactor into facades and services. And I know, Taya, we'll get back to your question on like how to refactor and dry up your tests a little bit, but let me jump to Mark. Did that bring up a question for you?
Oh, I was just wondering, you have the Senate, you're testing for the Senate member, like those methods in the service file. Would you need to test the House ones as well?
Yes. Yeah, this is just the code. I haven't gone into testing the refactor that y'all did in the workshop. This is just a test for what we did originally this morning. But yeah, I would also make another it block, or at least another describe block for getting House members and testing what I get back from that call as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, what Taya had asked, her question was around drying up tests. And I think like, where do we have some of the same stuff? So I guess in all of these, we are stubbing out this API call to Senate members. And so let me grab this. So here's kind of like all the code I need for stubbing. And if you want to stub out a method, I think I would do it in the spec helper. And I can just put it, let me just put it down here, make sure it works, and then we'll come back to it. So I think if I put a method here and just call it like senator, let's say like all senators stub, and then paste that code there. I think now I can get rid of this stub in my test and call it all senator stub, since that's in my spec helper. Let's run it. Yeah. So you can go ahead and put, like, to dry up some of your tests, you can put that into spec helper. You could also put it into another file and require it in your spec helper to dry up your spec helper a little bit too. Molly?
Yeah, I have another question about kind of the stubbing here. So like in this, we're always stubbing the actual API call, but like it seems like potentially in the facade, you could just stub the service, and then like in the whatever, in the next one up, you could just stub the facade. Like, I guess I see a reason both ways, but it seems like a bit more like accurate to what you're testing to just stub the, like what you're calling into versus like stubbing the API every time. Is there like a reason, or like you would do one versus the other?
I think I need to step here. Can I ask you to reword it? So what I'm understanding you're saying right now, is there a reason why we are stubbing out the API call versus what was the other part?
So like in the facade is calling Congress service. So like, why don't you just stub Congress service?
Got you. So yeah, I guess you could say like when this method is received, go ahead and give back this data. And then it wouldn't ever get to the call that made, where are we, service? Wouldn't ever get to these over here, which is like really where, since we're using webmock in this case, like as soon as it tries to make an HTTP request from your test, it's going to error out if you don't have that stubbed. And I think kind of like reason why I would stub out this instead of the actual method that calls this is, I guess mainly so that I think like in my test, like if I'm going to be stubbing out those methods, then I need to know like which methods call what API. And so I think eventually you are stubbing out that request. I think you could possibly misplace when that API gets called, instead of just saying like, when this API is called, stub it out, versus like, let me go ahead and identify every single time that this API is called and stub out that.
Okay. I guess I just like, it seems, I was, maybe the curiosity was like between integration and unit testing, like this seems to be more of an integration test because it's testing like all the stuff that gets down to that kind of like all at the same time, versus like having a unit test that's really specific to like the facade method.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think kind of where I see where you're coming from that. I think like if I were to have another method that also called this house members for some reason, like currently in my Congress facade, it's only here. But if I happen to have another facade method that also called that method, then I would also need to like stub out whatever other methods called that house members method. So it's kind of just like taking it a little bit of a step further to like stub as minimally as possible.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah. All right, y'all. We are about out of time. Oh, you know what? I just looked at this and saw one other thing that I do want to mention. I don't know if Brian mentioned this at all when he was doing his testing lesson. Did Brian go over like using nil instead of null within your tests? Null is like the empty object. If you take a look at the JSON within our fixtures, it's using null. And in Ruby, our empty object is nil. So it errors out. Like if you ever are to like copy and paste this as just like raw data within your test, like I did in my Horo spec, what was it for? Senate member spec. I had to convert these to nil because it errored out on null because null isn't empty in Ruby. It is in JSON though. All right, y'all. That's like it for me. I would say if you wanted to like continue practicing with this repo, I'll go ahead and get all of this pushed up for y'all. And it'll be on a different branch. I'm going to put this on a branch that's just like workshop complete or something like that. You'll be able to see it, refactor workshop complete. And I would say like if y'all wanted to get some extra practice in, these tests are currently passing. It might be good practice if you want to make a little note to yourself if you want practice with testing to come back to this branch and pull it down and create those tests for the refactor that we just did in the workshop. All right, y'all. Have a good lunch and we'll see you at 1 p.m. Mountain Time for code share. Code share? Peer code share. See y'all then.